Welcome to episode number 26 of the Crisis Intelligence Podcast. Today is Sunday, November 30th, 2014. I'm Melissa Agnes, and this podcast is brought to you by Agnes Day. Let's talk crisis intelligence. Hey Tom, welcome to the show. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us about what you do?
Hey everybody, I'm Tom Iovino. That's Tom Iovino. Pretend you owe somebody a bottle of wine, like you lost a bet. So it's Iovino. And I'm with Pinellas County government here on the west coast of Florida in the Tampa Bay area. And I'm a public information officer with the county government.
Cool. I like the Iovino.
You gotta always throw the Iovino in, yeah.
You do. It makes it memorable.
Of course.
It's those stories. I have a friend actually who will particularly like that one. I'll make her listen to the intro.
Nice.
So, we have an awesome, well, you came up with a really great title, a really great podcast topic, which I think it will be fun and interesting, and that is the Accidental PIO.
Yeah, this is kind of a funny story. I was in college, and one of the things I tried to do at the University of Maryland, I went there to university, and I started off in the journalism department, which is one of the top 10 journalism schools in the country. And after a while, I just didn't want to be there anymore. It seemed like a vocational school for journalists. So I figured, I would move over to the English department, which was kind of funny because I think I was the only person on a campus of 36,000 people with so many people trying to get into the journalism program. I was the only one trying to get out. Huh. So it's funny because I just thought that it would be a different thing for me. It would be a little bit more flexible. And it was funny because
You thought PIO or journalism?
Well, not really PIO. I didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up. Everybody asked, the typical question you ask a liberal arts major, so you're going to flip burgers. I said, well, no, maybe I'm not going to do that. Maybe I'll try something else. And the funny thing was, I had to do a lot of writing, and I had to convince, as an English major, I had to convince people who had PhDs about a topic, say Shakespeare, that what I knew was better than what they knew. And it was, I was writing a lot as a student. I was writing, there were periods where I was writing 150, 200 type pages a week. Going for my bachelor's degree, and I had some very tough professors who really respected the work I did, and so that was writing persuasively became something I wanted to do. And then I took a class on campus. I was one of those, they give you a couple of core classes you have to take, and you have to take science and math and all that stuff. And one of my classes I took was a class called the Sociology of Nuclear War, with a Dr. Kanjar. Hi, Dr. Kanjar. How you doing? I know she worked, last time I spoke to her, she was working for the government accounting office in D.C. But this class was fascinating. It was the sociology of nuclear war. And we learned so much about, the Cold War, basically. And this is in 1991 when I took the class. So the Soviet Union had just collapsed. And we were looking back at the post World War II through the 70s and the early 80s, and it became fascinating to me about the whole civil defense movement and part of and recovery and disaster and it was. And our final project for the class was we had to nuke a city, and then we had to bring the city back. And we chose Baltimore. We were in Washington, D.C., just outside of D.C. at University of Maryland. So we just drove up to Baltimore. And that was my first real true experience with civil defense emergency management, because we actually went down into the city of Baltimore's bunker. And we spoke with the guy in charge. I can't remember. I think it was Bob Hooper. It was his name. And we went down into the bunker. And there we were. 60, 80 feet below the city of Baltimore, looking at civil defense manuals. And it was fascinating. We did it was such an impressive thing to learn about that it always stuck with me. And then, when I ended up in Florida, I kind of worked between a couple different jobs. And I eventually got hired with the county's property appraiser's office. And that was a nice job. It was a foot in the door. But eventually I ended up in the communications department. And during the interview, one of the questions that was asked of me was, could I work in times of disaster? And I said, you know what? I'd rather be working in times of disaster than sitting around and wringing my hands. And we got into there, and I got the job, and we activated for a couple of storms. I still remember the first major storm activation I had to go through was Hurricane Floyd in 1999, which was projected to come through the state. And we actually went through the whole exercise of standing up the Joint Information Center and the Emergency Operations Center. And then we had, of course, Y2K. Everybody remembers that if you were around back then, that potential disaster that turned out to be a big snooze. And we kind of worked the emergency management aspect, public information, where it started in our old boss's eyes. Really, hurricane preparedness started in April and ended in October. It was, we had all of our plans kind of led up to, when the storm arrived, but we never had any plans what happened afterwards. And then
that seems kind of strange for me.
Well, it's funny though. I mean, it was the kind of thing where people never thought it was possible. I think that a part of our planning was we just assumed it would never happen to us. So we had plans that just led up to the arrival of the storm, and that was it. And it was strange. I mean, it was missing something enormous right there.
No kidding.
So and I think it was definitely an oversight of our old boss, the first director I worked under. And what happened was then Hurricane Charlie came in 2004, and we were waiting for the arrival of that storm. That was the Hurricane Center had the line straight over Pinellas County. We were due. And, and what happened was the storm changed course just hours before it was supposed to make landfall here, and it went through Port Charlotte. And I was sent down to kind of just document what we were doing. We were sending mutual aid down to Charlotte County. And I got there, and I could not believe my eyes. I could not believe what I was seeing. The destruction was everywhere. Everywhere you turned, I had never been in that kind of a situation before. And what happened was, we had seen some incredible things, just the way the wind, 145 mile an hour sustained winds with gusts over 170, and it just blew down reinforced concrete walls. And we were just stunned by what we had seen. And I drove back to the office, and while I was driving, I was just writing furiously my thoughts for the what I had seen. And I had gone back home and written everything down. I still have the essay. I posted it on the Weather Underground site, and I've got it on my blog there. The next day, I came into work and I told my boss, I said, "This is what we have to do now. I want to dedicate myself to this, getting people prepared for hurricanes, because what I've seen tells me that if we don't do this, it's going to be a disaster. It's going to be a catastrophe." And that was the moment at which we started to take it seriously. I took it seriously. And from that point on, everything, pretty much a lot of what I'd done at work became public information for disasters. We had, for instance, there were ridiculous things we had done. We had told people, put shutters up on your home. Now, in Florida, most homes are concrete block. So when you look at people putting, shutters up on their homes, typically they're nailing into wood. Well, we don't have wooden homes here in Florida for the most part. Most of them are concrete block. So how do you do that? Well, we have a video team in our office. So what we did was we put together a video on how to shutter your home with plywood. The funny thing about this, Melissa, was that we took this video and we shared it and with the state of Florida up in Tallahassee at the Disaster Preparedness Office, and they shared it with other states. And it was funny. I was at the National Hurricane Conference when it was in Austin back in 2009 in Austin, Texas. And I was walking down the hallway, and a guy from coastal North Carolina saw me from Florida in Austin, Texas, and said, "You're the plywood guy." And what had happened was his county had gotten the video and were running it on their TV station to educate their citizens how to put up plywood, how to measure, so everything we've done from that point was to develop the materials for people to prepare themselves. One of the things we tell people constantly is that you've got to take the moment now to prepare. There is no pause button on disaster. And, if when that storm is 24 hours off the coast, you can't stop everything and go get everything you need. You can't go to the grocery store or go to the, home, the home goods store and the building supply store and get everything you need. You can't do that. You have to do that well in advance. So I was one of the driving forces in getting the county to look at a 365-day preparedness kind of a model, where we developed our messaging throughout the entire year, and not just for hurricanes. I bet you didn't know this, but Florida gets more tornadoes per acre than any other state in the country.
Wow.
And they're not the big Kansas, Oklahoma ones, but we get more of them in Florida than anywhere else. So you get these category, these F1, EF2 tornadoes that come through, and they do an incredible amount of damage. But people aren't prepared for it because they typically happen in January through March. So if we're only talking about disaster preparedness from April through October, and the only thing we care about is hurricanes, somebody's going to get hurt.
Yeah, you're missing major communication points.
Yeah, and the thing is also, I don't know if you heard about this in Florida, but in the summer it gets hot here.
No kidding.
Seriously, you wouldn't believe it. We're semi-tropical, and the days are in the mid-90s, and it's high humidity, and nobody wants to go outside and start slinging plywood in July. They want to do it. We wanted to do it in February, so that's part of the reason why we do this year round. Is we want people to make those preparedness steps early in the season. And this is what's happened. We started to do this, and the message was great, but the problem was we were having a problem communicating beyond just what we could put out as a county. So one of the things I did was I asked my supervisors, I asked my bosses, I said, what kind of extra training can I get? And I knew about the Emergency Management Institute up in Emmitsburg, Maryland. And I asked to be sent up for the Advanced PIO class. It's a full immersion class, which is really just, if you're a public information officer, you need to look into this. And in this class, the Advanced PIO class was just the moment, the monkey touched the monolith moment for me. It was the moment, the aha moment, where we were in a room with other PIOs from around the country simulating a disaster, and it just hit me that we needed trained people. We needed trained public information officers everywhere in the Tampa Bay area, across the state. We needed it, because if we didn't have it, we were going to be in a lot of trouble when the storm came. So when I came back to Florida after that, I was then qualified to teach the basic PIO class. And immediately I registered to become an instructor. And since then, I've taught about 25 editions of this class. And when you put about 20 people through each class, you can see we've taught a lot of PIOs. And these are people from all around the state. Actually, one time we even had 2 PIOs who came in from Texas. And I'm trying to figure out why they were coming from Texas. I couldn't understand. And it turns out that these 2 guys were on Fort Hood in 2009 when the soldier shot up the base. And their commanding officer told them, find the next PIO class you can in the country, wherever it is, and we're sending you. And it turns out they came to our PIO class.
Wow. And
they could have taught the class with the experiences they had. It was powerful. It was gripping to hear firsthand what had happened. And to hear that from people who actually went through that disaster, that catastrophe, was again, it is just eye-opening. And it's the kind of stuff that really forces me, really compels me to continue to push as hard as I do, to train my colleagues, to train my friends from across the bay, over in the surrounding counties, and really around the state. Because when that crisis moment hits, you really have to be trained. You have to be prepared, and you have to also get that public ready. I mean, that's part of the mission as well. So, one of the things I'm doing and trying to do is, in addition to doing my regular day job and in teaching through the county, is I also started my own blog called the PIO Chronicles. And
I'm a fan.
Well, thank you. I'm very appreciative. You're actually one of the you're one of the sites I saw, that I wanted to model after.
Oh, thank you.
Also, you had written some great articles about the current Ebola crisis that I couldn't believe that there were other people out there who thought the way I did about
It's
this kind of stuff.
frustrating when you're looking at everybody else who's not thinking that way, isn't it? You hear the
It's
passion coming
incredible.
out of me.
When you find that person who's actually thinking your way, that you get that simpatico thing going.
Yeah.
It's great. I created the blog as a teaching tool because during these classes I tell people about different things. Well, there's this book or this, and I never documented any of it. So the problem is that if people were in class, they got it. If they hadn't been in class, they didn't have any of the benefit of what I had researched and looked up. So part of the reason why I wanted to put the blog out was so that people could have access to all those resources. And it's filled with personal stories. It's filled with things that have happened to me.
That's what makes it personable. That's what people relate to. That's what they're going to get attached to.
That's
what's going to keep them coming back.
And one of the things I learned about English, in my English classes, and also about public information, was when you tell a story well, people remember it.
I have actually, if you haven't listened to it, I have a really great podcast with Greg Power, who is the president of Weber Shandwick Canada, which is a huge agency, global agency for PR and crisis. And it's all about actually storytelling for crisis and emergency management. Mm-hmm. And storytelling is communication. It's the heart of relatability and communicating with humans. So
it is, and really, people have to know you care before they care what you have to say. Mm-hmm. And we try to communicate that through our PIOs. I'm not going to knock anybody in fire or police because I work very closely with them, but sometimes they get excited about the toys.
Of course they do.
If a fire chief has a new piece of apparatus, by golly, go get me coverage about the new piece of fire apparatus. No reporter worth their salt is going to come out and just talk about the fire truck. They want to find out about how it's going to make the firefighters' jobs easier. They're going to find out about how it's going to save lives, how it's going to, the person on the 20th floor of the condominium that now can be reached by the ladder. What does that mean to them? Mm-hmm. What does it mean to the person who lives near the fire station who's going to hear this thing drive by at 3 a.m. every day? These are the kinds of stories that people want to read about. And when you make it personable, that's where it really gets good. That's where it really gets good. And where people sit down and they want to pay attention. And, we've done so many different things over the years where we've done that done the personal thing where we make it right down to where people's levels are. I go out and I talk a lot too. That's another thing I do. I do a lot of public presentations. And one of the things that we did was, I'd go out and I talk, and it's been a long time since the Tampa Bay area has been hit by a hurricane. 1921 was the last time we actually took one making landfall here in Pinellas County on the west coast of Florida. Okay. So when people hear me talk about hurricanes, they always say, well, we're protected here.
No, you're lucky.
The Indians, put a blessing on the area, or it's the place of high ground. We never get hit by hurricanes here. And another thing people say is, well, they're never any big deal. They're no big deal. Because, I was here in 2004 and we got hit by Hurricane Charlie, and Hurricane Charlie didn't come anywhere near us. And usually there's one person in those talks who says you're wrong. Because I lived through Hurricane Andrew in 1992, or I lived through Hurricane Opal in 1995, and this is what it's really like. And when somebody stood up like that and said that because they had been through it, that shut everybody up, and they paid attention and they listened to that survivor. So one year we decided, why not find survivors of storms and have them tell their story? And we put the call out, Melissa, through the Tampa Bay area. And this one gentleman got in touch with me. His name was, Herb Donald. And Herb Donald was 92 years old at the time. And he survived the 1928 Lake Okeechobee hurricane. Put it in perspective, it's the third deadliest natural disaster in American history. A storm came through. It's often referred to as the Lake Okeechobee storm because when the storm came ashore, it caused Lake Okeechobee to overflow its dikes. About 2,500 to 4,000 people died here in Florida. He survived the storm. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So we bring our cameras out. We start talking to him, and he's the most eloquent speaker. And he had everything with him. He had all his faculties with him. He was clear as clear could be. And he told his story, and it sent shivers down my spine. Talking about, his mom working in the church as a relief center, and some woman who was on top of a roof holding her baby, and the wind came and tore the baby out of her arms, and the baby just disappeared into the water.
Shit.
And or the guy who was floating in the debris field in the water, and he reached up in a last ditch attempt to grab onto a piece of wood, and his hand went over a nail, and he passed out from the pain. And when he woke up, the only thing that saved his life was the fact that his hand had been stuck through with the nail, and he was still attached to the board. And he told those stories, and the emotion on his face, Melissa. This is 1928. He's telling me this in 2008. And the emotion was as if it happened yesterday.
And it's not something that you forget.
And he told us this story, and we put it to tape, and immediately people started to watch and they started to react. And and every year we have a media day. The first, right around the 1st of June, we have the reporters in to our emergency operations center. And that year we invited the people we had interviewed, and we're showing the video. And Mr. Donald was up front with his wife. And we're showing the video, and the reporters are just sitting in rapt attention. Actually, you can hear gasps as he's describing what happened in the Lake Okeechobee storm. And he pulls me aside, Mr. Donald, and he says, "Is it okay if I say a few words?" I said, "Sir, you could say whatever you want to when the video's over. You've earned the right." And he stood up, and he delivered the most eloquent talk I'd ever heard, the most eloquent words I'd ever heard about disaster preparedness when it comes to hurricanes. And he said, "We will get one. It's a matter of time. And it's up to you." And he pointed to each of the reporters to tell the story about how people need to get ready. And he spoke very briefly, and he sat down. And I asked at the end, I said, "Okay, are there any questions?" And not one single reporter said anything. So I thought I'd hallucinated or something like that. I hadn't said it really. I just said it in my head. I hadn't actually voiced it. So I said it again. "Are there any questions?" And one reporter raised his hand and said, "Are these people available for interviews?" I said, "Go right ahead." And that story got so much traction. The amazing thing was there was another gentleman who was we interviewed about he was living in Atlantic City in 1944 during the Great Atlantic Hurricane that went up the East Coast. When Hurricane Irene, followed by Hurricane Sandy, came up the East Coast, that video on YouTube got just spiked in a number of hits, number of views. We're talking a neighborhood of like 16,000, 18,000 views, because it was referred to as, could it be as bad as the Great Atlantic Hurricane in 1944? So people are seeing this from survivors who said it's terrible. Get ready. And we hope that, one day we'll be able to convince somebody that maybe I shouldn't stay on the beach. Maybe I need to get out. Maybe I need to do something. And that's our goal. I mean, really, when it comes to disaster preparedness and becoming that PIO, that's our goal, is to just convince people to do the right thing. It's
to relate to them on some kind of emotional level.
It is.
Go ahead.
And really, the amazing thing about it is I've seen too many emergency managers look at people who won't evacuate and say, "Well, they're dumb. They're dumb." And I'm going to tell you this. It may feel good to say it, but as soon as you say somebody's dumb, they're tuned you out.
And you've tuned them out.
And you've tuned them out. You don't know what their situation is. Why are they there? Could it be because they don't know how to get off? They don't know how bad the storm's going to be? Could it be that they don't have the means to get out of harm's way? Could it be that, they're terrified? And if you call somebody stupid because they won't do something, then you're never going to get them back.
No.
And, that's not our goal. We want to reason with people. It's kind of funny. We draw parallels. And one of the great parallels I use when I talk is about, seatbelts. I always ask people, "So how'd you get here?" when we go to a talk. And, people say, well, we drove. I said, okay, what's the first thing you do when you get behind the wheel? What do you think it is? And most people say, well, I'll turn on the radio. Ha ha ha. Okay. But then we get to the point where it's the seatbelt. Why do you put the seatbelt on? In case I get into an accident. So when you get in your car, you're going to get into an accident. Well, no, I put it on just in case. Okay, just in case. Now, let me ask you, how many people have airbags in their cars? And everybody raises their hand. I usually make some funny joke about the last time I went car shopping. I found a car with like 65 airbags in it. And then I ask people, how many people do you know go home at the end of a day of driving, park in their driveway, slam the door shut and say, I'm furious at the Ford Motor Company, at General Motors, at Toyota, at Nissan, because I spent all this money on a seatbelt and airbags and I didn't get into an accident. Nobody does that. That's insane. Yet, talk to people who won't evacuate. Talk to people who say they're disappointed that Hurricane Charlie didn't hit the Tampa Bay area because they thought it was going to be like a blizzard. And it's stunning that people can't draw that parallel, and that they'll put themselves in harm's way. And the idea is to break down and really excuse-proof the planning process. And that's really what we're looking for. We want to excuse-proof.
Excuse-proof. I like that.
I mean, I can't do it because, and that's what we're looking to do. I mean, that's ultimately what we're looking to do. We want to excuse-proof disaster planning. And, I've heard them all. I have kids. I don't know what to do with them. I have expensive stuff. I don't know what to do with it. I don't have a car. It's funny. We work with our local transit authority. And, we worked out a plan after Hurricane Katrina where you can get on the bus here locally anytime during an evacuation for free and go to your friend's house or go to a shelter. So, and after the storm, there's a period of 48 hours where they're going to run the buses free of charge so you can get back home.
Do people know this?
They do. We tell them every day. And, when we tell them, it's like we put it in the buses and it'll eventually sink in. We hope it'll eventually sink in. But we communicate it. And part of that communication is helping our friends in the media understand it.
It's, I love everything that you're saying. And it's making me think of a video that I saw recently. I wrote about it on my blog. And it's a Budweiser ad.
Oh, good.
Yeah, it's actually not a Budweiser ad. The message is for drinking and driving. So yes, Budweiser is related. They're campaigning for a greater cause that they're very much related to.
Of course.
But so if you think about drinking and driving campaigns, I'll speak for myself. I think Mothers Against Drunk Drivers. I think all of the videos that I've seen in my lifetime of. One impacting one was, a 10-minute clip of horrific accidents just all meshed in together. And the message is, you're trying to relate, you're trying to instill fear and scare people into not, drinking and driving. So I've seen a ton. I've seen the kids that don't come home, the parents, all these different messages, or these different storylines for the same message, actually. And Budweiser just released one a couple weeks ago. And it starts off with this guy, mid-20s, say, who brings home a puppy. And he's playing with his puppy, and he loves his puppy, and the puppy's growing up, and you can see him. He's with his friends on the beach, and the dog is there jumping into the water while he's with his friends, and everybody's petting the dog while they're having this conversation amongst friends. So you get a feel for the moment, the dog's role in this person's life, his relationship with his dog. And then you see the dog, I already have chills. You see the dog at home, and you see the guy leaving his house with a couple friends. They've got, of course, Budweiser beer, a case of Budweiser beer in their hands. They're leaving, he says, bye pup, whatever the dog's name is, and he leaves. And then you just see the dog waiting. And at this point, actually, you have no idea what the commercial is about. You think it's a commercial for Budweiser. And the dog's waiting. And he's waiting, and you can see that a car rolls by, and he gets excited. It's going to be his, however you want to word that, the person he lives with, his master, his dad, whatever.
Yeah.
And he gets excited. The car continues to drive by. All right, the dog lies back down, and he's waiting, and he's waiting, and he's waiting. And then the message across the screen is some, like puppies, some dogs, they wait forever.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, I've got chills right now. And anyways, the message is, and then it goes into drinking and driving. And then you do see the next morning comes, the door opens, the guy comes home, and he goes, "Oh, I'm so sorry, bud. I couldn't come home last night. I had a bit too much to drink. I decided to stay over at my friend's house." And it ends that way.
Yeah.
And it ends with, this dog got lucky type thing. My whole point of this, when I'm watching this video, I'm always looking for, I'm in crisis communication, go figure. I'm always looking for ways to help organizations communicate their messages better and communicating their messages in times of dire emergency, whether it's a crisis, an emergency, whatever the case may be. And when I saw this commercial, all I could think was, wow, I'm thinking back to all of the different ads and campaigns that I've seen against drinking and driving. This is the first time in my experience that I've seen one with a dog. Now, if you think of who this is going to touch, I've got a German Shepherd at home that I'm a big fan of. I'm a big dog lover, but not just that. People who are animal lovers, whether they were touched by the other commercials or ads or not, whether they have kids and the ad was about the kid that drinks and drives, whether they have, whatever the story is, however it touched them on an emotional level, Budweiser was smart. And they said, what's a different story that we can tell, that we will touch a lot of the same people, but that we may touch a type of person that we've never touched before. The type that doesn't have the kids that have the dog, for example.
Yeah.
So it's always about finding a way to communicate your message. When you have an important message, the message didn't change. The message is the same. The storyline and the emotional level or the way that they wanted to emotionally connect with the audience, that was a little bit different. And it made a big impact on me just in my analysis of the video, their message, their strategy behind it, in terms of what I do and how I can bring that to the table with my clients. But it probably made, on a different level, just on the drinking driving level that they wanted to reach people on, it probably made a really big impact on those people who are animal lovers.
Yeah, and that's the key. You have to start thinking. That's when we start to think about the message, that communication. And it's funny because you bring up animals, because one of the things that, one of the heartbreaking stories out of Hurricane Katrina was many people stayed behind with their loyal pets and they both perished.
Or how many people left their pets at home.
And and these rescuers were finding these pets with their owners because the owner didn't, and it's the thing is, if you love your pet enough to risk your pet's life, to risk your life to stay with your pet during a disaster, you love your pet enough to have a plan. And, and to know where you're going to go in the event of a hurricane. Because, again, unlike an earthquake or unlike a tornado, a hurricane's going to give you days of notice. We're fortunate here in Florida because that disaster gives us days of notice. You see it on a satellite. It's coming. We give it a name. We invite it to the dinner table every night for a week plus. And we get ready for it.
But and you're right. But the other side of that is also in the PIO, the emergency managers, just the cities, the government agencies' responsibility in identifying with that person and making sure that the communications are out there that say, this shelter is animal friendly, for example. So it goes both sides of understanding your audience.
And, even more importantly, think about people who have a parrot or or an exotic animal like that. Most pet-friendly shelters only accept cats and dogs. Mm-hmm. And that's another message we have to continuously put out because there are people who have a lot of money invested with their parrots and with their snakes and with their iguanas and their lizards, and they don't come. So, but again, you think hurricane season every year when they print the calendars, June 1st is on there. So as the holidays roll around, you go buy a new calendar for 2015. Guess what? June 1st is on there. You know that when hurricane season begins, you better have a plan. And that's what we communicate, that year-round communications. That's where we're pushing.
That's good. I have a question for you. Talking about the planning in February because, June or July is too hot to be outside and boarding up your walls and your windows. Is this part of your communication strategy where you actually say in February, hey, you're going to have to do it, or we're telling you you're going to have to do it. It's for your own safety. You're not going to want to do it in July. It's going to be too hot. Do it now.
Too darn hot. Yeah, that is. And what we've done is over the years, I've developed a couple different tools to do outreach year round. We have news releases that go out every month the first of every month, we have a news release that goes out, what you should be doing, whether it's the holidays, donate your old, your older food in your survival kit and buy new stuff, or, get rid of the old batteries and buy new ones on sale, or, now in February is a good time to get out there and do this kind of work, line up a contractor in November to, start looking at a contractor, sometime in November so you can get them to do work in the spring so they're not rushing to get it done in time for hurricane season. These are the kinds of things we push out on a regular basis. We also do something that we've won a number of awards for called the eAlert newsletter, which is a newsletter we send out electronically. We have about 6,500 subscribers on it, and then it relays in organizations. So, for instance, the city of St. Petersburg, they'll get it and they'll relay it to all their employees on their email archive. So as we go through this, as we develop these tools, we share them with our partners. And the most gratifying thing I can remember, Melissa, was walking into a United Way meeting about disaster preparedness, and their preparedness kit was laying on the desk. So I just picked it up to look at it. It was a training kit for their volunteers. And I opened it up. It was the past 6 months editions of the eAlert. They'd actually printed them out and put them into the folder. So it was gratifying to see that the material I was putting out was getting into the right hands to train people. It felt good for me.
Absolutely.
And that's the kind of thing we just want to keep pushing that stuff out. And big chunk of it is the training. For other PIOs to coordinate the message, to push the message, to be out there in the front. Not to be reactive, but to be proactive. And I've heard people say, well, you're doing the reporter's job. I'm not doing the reporter's job. The reporter's job is to find the story. If I help the reporter find the story, then I've done my job. If I help that reporter find that story, I've done my work as a PIO.
As any crisis or emergency communicator, whether that is a PIO, whether you're working for an organization, you're dealing with some kind of organizational crisis, if you can, two things actually. If you can first thing, I'm trying to think, okay, how do I start this? I'm always talking about Twitter. Twitter in a crisis especially in North America, it's a leading social media channel for dissemination of news and updates and rumors and you name it, it's going to happen on Twitter. If you know this, and you know that a tweet is 100 to 140 characters in length, maximum, and you're developing your key message statements, but you know that they're going to be communicated, they're going to be tweeted and retweeted on Twitter, why not think in the sense of having your key message statements or key message points, and this can be in press conferences just like it can be as a written statement, from 100 to 100 characters in length. Why not make it easy to directly feed the Twitter sphere, because you know it's going to be there and you know that things can easily get lost in translation when you're condensing down to 140 characters. Secondly,
the beauty about that is having that pre-scripted, thinking ahead, and we've developed these. Because we've sat through activations of scary storms, storms that were going to hit the Tampa Bay area, and then I also deployed up to New York City after Hurricane Sandy, and I know the messages that are out there. So we developed a suite of messages that we can get ready to send out, and we have things timed down. So if we know we're at the hurricane watch goes up, we know what we should be doing, and that's part of the key is having it all prepared. Again, you can't go stop time and learn all this stuff or prepare all this stuff when the situation's upon you. No. You have to have this in the can. You have to have this ready and drilled. And
you have to have the skills. So my second point that I wanted to make, because you're talking about feeding the reporters, you know that the media is going to be reporting on the story. If you look at what the media needs to do, the media needs to shape and tell a story so that they can sell headlines, that they can get the traffic, so that they can do what they need to do to monetize. But the key point there is that they're going to shape and tell stories. If you can work storytelling into your crisis communications, you are feeding the media that story that they're going to tell. They don't have to take your information and now develop a story that's going to be interesting. You're literally feeding them their story. What communications are going to actually make it to the end viewer, to the end audience? It's, in that case, the story that you had control over.
Exactly. And it's a story that you guide. For instance, one thing we did this year, we rolled out, we'd always had a list of, topics that we wanted reporters, hey, do you think about this? Do you think about this? This year before Media Day, I came up with a list of doing some quick I was an English major, so I have to do the math really quickly here. There are 6 months in hurricane season. So June 1st to November 30th. That means there's 24 weeks. So if there are 24 weeks in hurricane season, that means if we gave the reporters 2 story ideas a week to work with, 48 story ideas, they would never run dry of story ideas for during the season when the editor says, okay, come up with a story. Mm-hmm. So we put together 48 story ideas and we put them on our website and we put them in the press packets that we handed out. And we said, okay, guys, we know it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. We know that June 1st is just the start of hurricane season. We know that it's sometime in August or September, your editor is going to come up to you and say, what are we doing for hurricanes? We've given you 2 story ideas every single week that you can use throughout the hurricane season. Some of them we can answer. Some of them our partners at the Transit Authority can answer. Some of them the Department of Health can answer. Some of them the school board can answer. But we've given you the story ideas to start with. We can't line up the interviews for you, but what we can do is we can give you the story ideas when it's time for you to come up with the idea and it's time for you to come up with that story and the editor demands it, give us a buzz. We'll help you out.
I'm always talking about knowing your audience and understanding their needs, their communication needs, the platforms they're on, the apps they use, all of that stuff, the technology that they're using so that you can feed it to them. Media is another audience.
Of course.
Understanding their cycle and their needs and their obligations it's brilliant what you're talking about.
And Melissa, I'm going to go even a step further. The media may be an audience, but you know what? They're an intermediary.
Absolutely. And they serve the two purposes.
When I talk to a reporter, I'm not talking to the reporter. I'm talking to the people sitting on the couch.
Yes.
In the living room. That's who I'm talking to. And I know that if I gear my message to that audience, the reporter becomes a vehicle for me to get that information out to them. And if I can work with the reporter to make their job easier, I can get it to that person in that living room that much easier.
Absolutely. It's good crisis prep. It's good crisis communication. And it applies to every single organization out there. Right now we happen to be talking about PIOs and emergency management. This stuff applies to the listeners out there who work for corporate organizations and deal with corporate crises.
It could be anything. I mean,
Absolutely.
it could be even something that's not a crisis, like the Super Bowl. We in the Tampa Bay area, we've had the Super Bowl here a couple times, and I know that in Hillsborough County, the county across the bay with the city of Tampa in it, that they've worked extensively to communicate messages about traffic, about where you can go and have a good time. I mean, this kind of understanding that cycle, understanding how people are going to gather that information and use it has been critical. And even something that's not a crisis, it still helps get the word out, because when you understand what the reporters need and you build that relationship with the reporters well in advance, that's the critical part. Don't be afraid of them. Build your relationship with them. Then you can work with them to get the information out.
Absolutely.
And I'll tell you something, and we can go on for an hour about the value of building that relationship with the local reporters, because I cannot tell you how many times we got something important. I could pick up the phone and call the reporters from the stations and say, look, here's our situation. Here's what we need. Well, and they help us.
You know what? If you're up to it, let's schedule that for another podcast, because that is a question.
All over it.
Awesome.
I am all over. You can see how bashful I am. I don't like to talk,
No, but honestly, that is a question I get asked all the time. That's a question that my colleagues that are media trainers get asked all the time. So that is a very good topic that we will definitely spend an hour dissecting and diving into.
Oh, it's the kind of thing where, when you can build the relationships, when there's a problem with the relationship, it's because something's broken and you got to fix it. You got to find out what needs to be fixed. And once you get that done, then everything else is gravy. I mean, at that point, having good media relationships doesn't mean that they'll cover for you or they'll make up lies for you. It means that you respect each other, you meet each other's needs, and everybody gives each other a fair shake. And that's what you can ask for. Because ultimately, when we need to talk to the citizens, we can't print up flyers and put them on everybody's door. we can't knock on everybody's door and talk to them. We need to work with our
No,
friends.
but it's also about using the tools at your disposal, and
Of course.
not that I'm calling human beings tools, but
No,
the
they're not.
media outlets
Yeah.
are tools. And if you do have a good relationship with them, and if they understand your goals and how it fits with their goals, that is a tool.
That's one tool in the arsenal. It's funny. People say, well, Tom, with social media now, are you guys going to get away from traditional media relations? Of course not. Of course not. That's just one tool. I'm a woodworker, Melissa.
I know.
We actually talked about this before the show, and I can't use my table saw to do everything. Okay, I need a table saw, I need a bandsaw, I need a router, I need all these other tools, these hand planes and chisels. So when I build something, the right tool for the right job comes out. If I say, well, I'm just going to use social media now to communicate to the citizens, then I'm missing golden opportunities to reach out and talk to the citizens through other methods that they use. And if I can't limit myself like that because I owe it to the citizens to make sure that I can reach them however they prefer to be reached.
Social media is a form of media. It's a medium for communication, and it's that what you're explaining is one of the reasons why I can't stand the term social media crisis. It drives you crazy. Social media's impact on crisis, maybe, but social media crisis doesn't exist.
No, it
Crisis
doesn't.
is a crisis.
And from small to big. I mean, we train public information officers from the firefighters on the scene of the two-car collision that's causing the backup, all the way to the massive hurricane impact. And the key is that we have to prepare everybody. We have to make sure that everybody's understanding of the principles and they apply across the board, whether what level of crisis it may be, they apply across the board. And when you have the basics down, it's like riding a bike. Once you have the basics down, you can ride any bike you want.
I like that. I have a question for you that I'm just excited to ask you.
Oh, please do. I can wait.
So I'm a big fan of PIO Chronicles, your blog. And
thank you.
I was going through, before jumping on this call with you, I just wanted to go and see if I had missed any posts but actually I hadn't, but you came out with a post, I believe this week, and I need to ask you about it. So you've learned a lot about being a PIO from NASA. You're a total space geek.
I'm a space nerd. Okay, I never worked for NASA, but I will tell you this. I had to explain this to somebody once. I am Apollo era technology myself. Okay, I was born just before Apollo 8 went on its historic voyage around the moon. So for me, I grew up in that world of, Apollo, of the moon landings, the beginning of the space shuttle program. I've seen it all the way through the International Space Station. For me, there's nothing more exciting than that whole process. And I've really come and, now that I live in Florida and I can go to the Kennedy Space Center, and see the launch vehicles and actually witness launches myself, it is so mind-boggling because I learned a lot from watching these things that happen in NASA, and the post you're referring to is actually about coordinating the release of information. And there's a great website called First Men on the Moon, and it just shows somebody. This is what the internet was created to do. They took the creators of the site actually took the voice channel from inside the control room and the voice communication between the Columbia, the Eagle, and Houston, the Manned Space Flight Center, and they added all telemetry data. And it was funny to watch that play out because you have in that room basically the vision of what a Joint Information Center is. You've got the lead PIO as Gene Kranz. You have the media spokesperson as Charlie Duke. You have all the other people who have to feed into this. And you learn a lot from just watching this. And I'm a total nerd. I'm sorry.
Don't be sorry.
I was an English major, but I'm a total nerd. I'm sorry.
No, I love that.
And the other thing is you're gonna discover about me is that I'm an exhibitionist. I'm not just an extrovert. I'm an exhibitionist. Everything that happens in my life I want to put out there because it relates to me personally, and I'm willing to share things like that. I'm willing to share things about my family. I'm willing to share things about my interests because I think there's a way to pull stories out of that and learn lessons out of that.
I agree.
And like with the NASA thing, it was just I was struggling.
I immediately opened up my notebook for the podcast. It was like, took that quote down. I was like big exclamations of having to ask him about this. I just want to. It's interesting.
Oh, it is, but also it's kind of like when you keep your eyes open, you're always a student.
Oh, so
You're
true. And
always learning.
being a blogger helps with that, I
Oh,
find
it does.
personally. At first, I was looking for stories everywhere, especially when I started blogging. I made a commitment of 5 posts a week without fail. I did it for 2 straight years. I'm still kind of back onto it, but not as hard on myself about it.
Sure.
But anyways, just that challenge alone, at first you're looking for stories everywhere, and now it's transformed into I see stories and lessons everywhere. There's being a blogger in my experience has really helped with that.
And you're always that student of it. It's the kind of thing where I mean, I've committed myself to 3 stories a week on the PIO Chronicles, and and just like with my woodworking blog that I run, I commit myself to learning something new where I want to communicate it to the people who read. And it's great stuff. I mean, it's just it forces you to learn to become that student of everything that you're interested in and learn more about it, delve into it. And when you have that kind of mindset, that kind of attitude, then it really takes off. It really starts to become something.
Yep, that's true. Personal learning and then helping others.
And that's ultimately, I'm believe it or not, we talked about how old I was and Apollo era technology. I am eligible to retire from the county in about 10 years. And I don't want the worst thing I could picture happening would be me walking out the door and nobody learning anything from what I've learned. That would be my nightmare. That all the knowledge I have just walks out the door with me and that's it.
But already that's impossible because of PIO Chronicles.
Because of the PIO Chronicles, I want to leave a legacy where nobody has to learn how to create the wheel or how to light a fire. I want to learn. I want to teach people what's out there that I've learned, so they can shorten their learning curve and do a better job. That's ultimately what I want to do with the blog.
Absolutely, and well, needless to say, I love that. That's the whole purpose of the Crisis Intelligence blog, the Crisis Intelligence podcast. So I'm totally in complete support of
You're a kindred spirit.
That.
This is awesome.
So in your little blurb to me, when you said, you sent me a message saying, I got the idea for the podcast, the Accidental PIO, you promise unorthodox advice for PIOs. And
unorthodox advice.
Yeah, and I'm, big fan of the whole I don't like that term, thinking outside the box, but unorthodox advice, or just new ways or interesting ways or different ways, or to get to the same goal, to expand the mind. So I'm opening up the floor to you. Unorthodox advice for PIOs.
The most unorthodox advice is the most basic advice I've ever given. And it's so basic, we often forget. The first thing you have to do is listen. We often go into these events, we have to create a hurricane plan. So we don't listen. We don't listen to what the citizens want. We don't listen to what we have to accomplish. We just start doing, and we don't listen.
That brings me to, I was in Bosnia earlier this year, speaking at a conference, and I was out, I was on a panel, I ran a panel, and my panel members were just amazing. And we were out on a search for Bosnian coffee, because in Bosnia, a big part of their culture is their coffee experience. And where we were was just very, American coffee. So we wanted the Turkish Bosnian coffee. Anyways, painting a scene here. But my friend, who is a member of the International Committee of the Red Cross, brilliant man, Miloš Marikic. I'm massacring his last name. I apologize, Miloš. But we're 4 of us, and we're sitting around. We're having our Bosnian coffee. We're having an amazing time in this beautiful, scenic, just beautiful spot. And we all realized that, we're all talking. Miloš, he's a talker, and he's so interesting. He's fascinating. He's worldly. And we looked at him and we go, hey, you're not saying anything. And he said words that will always stay with me. He said, when I talk, I don't learn anything.
Exactly.
And we all just kind of looked at him and went, well said.
Exactly. There's there's also a line in the movie Pulp Fiction where Uma Thurman's character asks John Travolta's character, are you the kind of person, when somebody's talking, are you listening, or are you thinking about what you're going to say next?
Yep, that's
and that was perfect. I want to be that person who listens. I really want to become that person who listens, because you know why? The majority of the time you're going to find the answer in just listening. and hearing what the problem is and addressing that problem. So often we run off, to find a solution for maybe a problem that doesn't even exist, or maybe the wrong solution for the problem. And we don't listen and we don't get it. So that's the most unorthodox piece of advice I'll give you right now to start off with. If you want more, maybe you have to have me on for more. I don't know. I'm trying to weasel my way back to another invitation, Melissa.
I already gave one.
Okay,
We're
good.
going to come back and talk about the developing relationships with the reporters before the crisis.
The other thing is kindness goes a long way. You can be as angry as you want to with somebody, but you smile. And you know what? People get angry because of a couple of reasons. One of them is they're not heard. We go back to point number one. So if a reporter's angry, find out what's wrong with it.
Absolutely.
And then you find out that you haven't listened to them. So, again, stuff like that is just simple.
I guess it's communication 101, the job of the PIO. And the other thing is that if anybody who's in emergency management, emergency response, emergency communication, emotions, no matter what, whether you're emotionally connected to the incident or not, there's an emotional factor there. It's hard to take away. It's human factor. Mm-hmm. So it's very possible that you have your bad day, or that you snap, or that an incident that you're actually responding to or managing gets to you. But one thing that's important to remember is that when those emotions take over, people stop listening to you. And as a public information officer, that is the last thing that you want to happen.
Precisely. Don't make it about you. It's about the situation. And that's really critical, because when you start to have your interests and your beliefs and everything in the middle of it, you're not listening. And you're not answering, you're not solving the problem. So again, these are some of the more unorthodox but kind of philosophical pieces of advice. But the reality is they're so simple that people often overlook them.
Oh, absolutely. You go into, it's funny, how that works. That you look for the more complex and complicated, but the very basic is where the answers lie, and the first things that we learned and the first things that we forget.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of funny to overlooking the basics. There's a story that I heard once about the British Army during World War II. They were having a manpower problem. Okay, they obviously, there were only so many residents of Great Britain, the United Kingdom at the time, and they needed their soldiers in the field, and they were having a problem because they were looking at their artillery units, and they had a certain number of artillery units, people in each artillery unit. And they could identify a role for everybody except for one person. There were people who loaded, and there were people who supplied the ammunition, and the people who laid the bore, the site, the safety person, the person who was transmitting the orders. But there's one person they couldn't figure out why this person was in this artillery unit. It turns out the person's job was to hold the horses when all the guns used to be carried by horses. And the simplest solution was they had never accounted for the fact that now trucks carried the artillery. It was the one guy who held the horses. That was his job. And they never figured it out until they sat down and analyzed and said, oops, we still have a guy holding the horses. You don't want to be that person holding the horses.
No kidding. Wow. I like that. That's a good story. I know that we're recording this right now and that it's not going to air for a couple weeks, and yet the Ebola crisis is ever evolving. But I am curious to still ask. I mean, I've asked a ton of people from different organizations, from hospital attendants to PIOs to city officials to emergency management departments. I'm always asking, what are you guys doing right now? What is your main focus in what's going on right now for the Ebola crisis?
The most important thing we want to do is we want to make something communicable, and the communicable thing we want to make is information. We want to be sure that people have the right information about any health crisis. The biggest concern we have is, unlike a hurricane, which you can see on a radar and you can identify when it's coming, is that any illness, the H1N1 virus in 2009, Ebola, is invisible. And when you can't see the enemy, when you can't see what you're afraid of, that adds to the fear. So if we can be a resource of information, actual, intelligent, factual information, and we can dispel the rumors and the myths, we've done our job. And that's really what we're looking at with any kind of crisis, but it becomes even more critical when it becomes a communicable disease. We have to have the right information out.
And how is it going for you? It's an uphill battle, eh?
It's an uphill battle, but you know what? We're winning.
Yeah.
I think ultimately we're winning. As we watch the news cycles go, there's less and less of the first few days when the first case appeared. Actually, I still remember the article you wrote about the first patients coming from West Africa to Emory Hospital.
The missionary doctors.
The missionary doctors, yeah, the nurse and the doctor from Doctors Without Borders, or the Samaritan's Purse. I'm sorry, they I can still remember the terror that my friends, my friends, my relatives on Facebook were sharing these fantastic stories about, 80% fatality rate, and we were all going to get it, and trying to rein that in and say, look, okay, let's take a look at the situation first. It is communicable, but you have to understand that this mortality rate is in countries that have been racked by civil war and have no functioning healthcare system. And when you get into a situation like that, any disease is going to become lethal. I mean, tetanus becomes lethal at that point. The flu becomes more lethal at that point. Malaria becomes cholera. All these diseases we don't see here in the West. We don't see in modern civilizations with working functional public health systems. When you go to some place that has that, you're not going to see the mortality rate. You're not going to see the spread on a disease like this. It's just not going to happen.
One thing that I think that a lot of organizations, the CDC included, there's a lot of information, and you're right, it's calming down. The fear Ebola is still there, and it's still a major risk. But people are receiving the right information. It's out there, it's kind of loud and in your face wherever you turn, which is very, very important. One thing that I haven't seen that I really want to see is one step above that is I want to see municipalities in conjunction with the hospital, the local police department, the government, the local government agencies. I want to see what Boston did. And I want to see it happen across North America, one by one, in every single municipality. I want to see not just the information that's being shoved down everybody's throat on social media, which I'm not saying that in a bad way. It absolutely needs to be shoved down everybody's throat. But I also want to see the proactive response from communities that take a stand in front of cameras and say, this is what we're doing, and this is how we're committed to keeping you safe. And even if they were all saying the same thing, it doesn't matter, because every person within each of those communities would feel as though they were talking to them, and they would go to sleep at night. First of all, you could directly say, this is what we're dedicated to doing, and part of that is communication, and you can go here, because if anything happens within our city limits, we will be posting it here, and we will be posting it first. Just that would help calm things. So I'm not seeing enough of that proactive external communication that isn't just revolved around educating through social and through visuals.
Exactly, and what I've done personally is and I advise other public information officers to do around the country is to read up as much as you can and to make sure that is communicated. And then our local health department here in Florida has been done a great job, not only saying that here's what we're going to do when Ebola gets here, but here's what happens with the flu, which kills 35,000 Americans a year. But I don't see anybody stampeding in for a vaccine.
You can't actually. I don't think that'll resonate. And I was in. I taught a McGill class yesterday. Yesterday when we aired this, and it was the second time I went. They wanted me to come back to talk about Ebola a little bit, and I got to listen to another presenter, anyways, and. That was one person, one intelligent student raised their hand, or didn't raise their hand, kind of stood up and said, the flu kills more people. But we can't fight the emotion with the rational or with the logic. Course. So saying that I don't believe anyways, it's not going to do anything. Because the irrational fear is Ebola.
But I will tell you this though. When you explain to people things in terms that they can understand, for instance, with hurricanes, and I'll go back to that, when you tell somebody, look, you wouldn't cross the street without looking both ways, right? I mean, you'd
Right.
walk out in the
Correct.
street, you'd look both ways before you step into the street. You wouldn't just walk in blindly. Then why is it you wouldn't take the necessary steps to protect yourself against a hurricane? If you'll take the simple steps to double check to make sure you don't get hit by a car,
Or put on your seatbelt like
or
you.
put on your seatbelt, or put a new fresh battery in your smoke detector, why wouldn't you take the simple steps to protect yourself against a hurricane's impact or against the spread of a communicable disease like the flu or Ebola? And that's when you sit down and you rationalize. We would much rather rationalize with people, and we finally get people. I hear this statistic thrown around all the time that you write for people with a sixth grade education. That's nonsense. In my book, that's nonsense. I don't think you talk at a PhD level. But one thing that I've known over the years is that people have intelligence in other areas. For instance, if you go to your mechanic may not tell me, what an evacuation level is. They may not be able to tell me how a storm surge is created. But you know what they can tell me? That your transmission's got a problem and I can fix it. And I want them to fix that. So their knowledge, they're capable of learning.
Oh, it's not calling anybody
exactly.
ignorant or stupid.
They're capable of learning. It's just a matter of getting them to learn, understand.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to storytelling. But it's funny that you say that. I do think that, and it's funny because I know that you know Dr. Thomas Phelan, who I had
Dr.
on.
Thomas, one of my co-instructors.
I know. He invited me to the Master's PIO program on Facebook, and you're constantly liking whatever I post there. So I'm like, oh, yeah, they know each other.
Of course I do.
But thank you. But so Dr. Tom was on my podcast a few weeks ago, or a couple months ago, I guess now. And we were talking, one of the things that we were talking about was the need to actually, and I'm going to use the term dumb it down, but I don't mean dumb.
Yeah.
But it's to communicate in a lower communication level or a lower grade level, if you want to grade it. And that's only and I do believe in that for getting straight to the point in emergencies and in crises, because first of all, we default back to, what our mother tongue, whatever that may be, or whatever the case is in an emergency. So you do lose senses there. You do lose rationale that you would have otherwise had. And why write evacuation plan when you can say, or evacuation route when you could say, get out or exit?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And again, I've got a great. I'm actually blessed with a great sounding board in my house. My two sons are very intelligent kids, and they're 16 and 13 now. And if I can explain it to them and they understand what Dad's trying to communicate, I know I can explain it to everybody. And
it's part of being a communicator,
and that's it. Understanding. Okay, well, what's the critical point? What do we have to know? And really, it's finding the people who aren't. The old expression, you can't see the forest for the trees. If emergency managers sit down and talk about something, the message is going to be so complicated and convoluted that it's going to be almost incomprehensible. That's why somebody like me, an English major who doesn't come from the background of disaster response or first responder, I can interpret.
Yep. I have a talent for that too.
And put that in. It's the kind of thing where I found that some of the most successful PIOs are people who aren't specialists, but they know how to communicate it. And they're able to grasp the key salient points. I was at a sewer main break a couple of weeks ago. You know what? I didn't know a thing about pipe diameters or pressure or anything, but you know what? I knew enough where I can communicate, hey, here's the situation. Here's what you got to know.
It's an asset. It's an important underlying skill set for PIOs and for any communicator, no matter what.
Exactly, and and that's crisis. The key. It's I don't think it's dumbing down. I think it's a matter of understanding that not everybody is at the same level you are.
Yeah, and also about clearly communicating your message and understanding the physical and human aspects of emergencies. Your mind kind of goes into a cloud because of panic or because of whatever the case is. So your sole purpose is to make sure that you go through that cloud and you communicate the important messages that you need to communicate to save lives.
Exactly, and that's one of the things I teach. In my PIO classes, I teach people. They try to get so complicated. They get lost in the weeds and the details. I say, look, for the next 2 hours, what do you want people to do? For the next 3 hours, what do you want people to do? And really, when you break it down into that kind of mindset, you understand better how to communicate to people because, if I say hurricane preparedness, it could be any one of a million things you can do. But to know if you need people to do something for the next 2 hours, that reins it in. Somebody described it once as saying, okay, try to write the history of the world on one piece of paper. You can't do it. Try to write the history of your hometown on one piece of paper. Now it becomes a manageable task. And when you bring your focus down like that, it really clarifies things and it makes it easier for you to do it.
I like that. Tom, I've taken up a lot of your time already
Melissa,
this evening. Where can people find, and I really appreciate this conversation I've had so much fun, and I think that there's so many good pieces of advice here for people to hopefully take away and apply. Inspiring thought and encouraging action. What do I normally say? Something like that.
Oh, shucks.
Something
That's
like
swell,
that.
Melissa.
But where can people find and follow you? Because you've got a lot of good stuff out there that they need to find.
Okay. Well, where I work is at Pinellas County Government. So that's Pinellas County, Pinellas County, all spelled out, all one word, .org. And /emergency is the emergency management site that I oversee over with the county. You can also find me on my blog at piochronicles.blogspot.com. That's where I put my personal observations and some of the lessons I've learned. And I try to build that as a learning resource.
Awesome. And you're on Twitter?
I'm on Twitter at tomsworkbench.com. I'm also at piochronicles.com. So I'm out there as well, so people can find me there.
How do you find that, managing 2 Twitter accounts?
It's great on a tablet. It's great on my smartphone. It's not so good on a desktop because you have to sign out and sign back in. But you can keep multiple profiles open on the smartphones and the tablets, which I think makes them a little superior to the desktop program.
Wait a second, back up.
What?
No, you need to be using something like TweetDeck or Hootsuite if
you see, but you could do it. But you could do it natively in the Twitter app.
You could.
Yes,
but you don't have to sign out and sign back in.
Okay, if you want to stay on Twitter.com, you can do it that way. But the native the Twitter app on the phone, on the Android.
I agree with that. Twitter, the apps are awesome, but I'm talking about
the apps
desktop.
are awesome. Desktop, you can do all kinds of stuff. I'm Apollo era technology. Okay. So I have a hard time grasping some of the new stuff. So
that's funny. No, but I honestly, personally, I love TweetDeck on my desktop. It allows me to. It's the same as Hootsuite, but I'm really annoyed with always having all these tabs open. So I like that it's a window that I can flip to rather than a tab that I have to find. If that made any sense. On my desktop,
I'll tell you.
Yeah. So, and I have all my tabs or my columns, I should say. And I don't often tweet out on behalf of Agnes Day just because I tweet on Melissa Agnes, but I can very simply. And even if I want to retweet something, I can hit the retweet button and choose whether I'm retweeting it via Melissa Agnes or Agnes Day. So that's just my desktop, but just a little piece of.
Thanks for passing it along to this dinosaur.
But hey, you're not the only one listening who's doing that. So we're hitting 2 birds here. Awesome. Tom, thank you so much for chatting with me. I've had a blast.
Melissa, it was awesome. Thank you very much for taking for setting this up. And it just hopefully we'll keep this going in the future. Maybe we'll get some comments back on it. So we'll see where this goes.
Sounds good. Actually, I'll ask you. So what I like to do is I like to have my guests write a blog post on whatever subject, whatever can tie into the podcast, because I find that podcasts are always us talking to each other and the rest of the world listening in. Oh, the rest of the world, I wish. People listening in.
Wait until my mom finds out about this. She's going to listen in. This is going to be great. You're going to have one extra listener. It's going to be awesome.
Awesome. But yeah, so when I asked for a blog post, which I always publish the same week that the podcast goes live, I feel like it opens that door for comments and just makes it more of a two-way conversation with the rest of the audience, which is what I'm always looking for. I want people to feel like they can weigh in on the conversation and learn more and help others learn more and et cetera, et cetera. So,
okay. Do you want it on woodworking?
Yeah, sure. If you could tie woodworking in with PIO and crisis management, awesome.
I'm sure at some point I will.
But you did already in this podcast. So awesome. Tom, it's been such a pleasure chatting with you.
Melissa, thank you very much. You take care. Have a good night.
so much for tuning in and listening to this week's episode of the Crisis Intelligence Podcast. I release a new episode every Sunday, so if you haven't already done so, be sure to subscribe to the Crisis Intelligence Podcast over on the Crisis Intelligence blog at agnesday.com/blog or on iTunes or on Stitcher. And while you're at it, head on over to iTunes and Stitcher and would really appreciate it if you left us a review and your feedback. You can also follow me on Twitter at Melissa_Agnes. And if you'd like to reach out to me to ask me a follow-up question from this week or a past podcast, or if you'd like to discuss the possibility of having me come and speak at an upcoming event, then you could email me directly at magnes@agnesday.com. Thanks so much for tuning in this week, and I look forward to talking even more crisis intelligence with you next Sunday.